Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here on Point of View. We're going to spend some time today talking about what we might describe as the orphan heart. We'll explain more about that in just a minute. We have an in-studio guest today, Walker Moore, and he is with All-Star Ministries and also has been in ministry for more than 35 years, really challenging students to really accept the Word of God. And he's in this particular community right now because they have individuals coming from all over the world, literally, to be trained. And he's just down the road, so he decided to join us in studio as we talk about his book, Escape the Lie. Might mention his previous book as well, Rite of Passage Parenting: 4 Essential Experiences to Equip Your Kids for Life, and actually has been writing a column for many years, The Rite of Passage Parenting, so that's another aspect of that. So, Walker Moore, great to have you in studio with us today.
Well, thanks for having me today. I'm looking forward to this.
Our plan was originally to do it by phone, but you're just down the road, and you explain for just a minute. You got students coming in, some just came in from Ethiopia, so talk about all the training that you're going to be doing the next couple of days.
Well, what we are, we're a Rite of Passage organization that we help students close down their adolescence and move into adulthood. 5 weeks ago, they came to Dallas to be trained, so now they've been working for 5 weeks in different countries around the world, and they're coming back for debriefing today, tomorrow, and be trained till Saturday to go home and live out the lifestyle of an adult.
Well, it's really good. Rite of Passage, and again, you might want to find out more about that. By the way, we do have quite a bit of material on the website today, so you can get to know Walker Moore a little bit better. First of all, we have an interview that was done with him about his book, Escape the Lie: Journey to Freedom from the Orphan Heart. We also have the book there, in case you'd like to see a little bit more about that. And then we have a link to All-Star Ministries, so you can follow the link, you can follow the article, you can see the book, and there are some great stories there. But I've got to, this is fun every once in a while when you have somebody that's a Guinness Book World Record holder. I mean, in some respects, I don't know if the Guinness Book cared, but I thought it's pretty funny that a year ago, in August, you celebrated your 40th year in ministry. And you did something which I think is pretty remarkable. So tell us about that.
Yeah, 2 years ago, I was thinking about my 40th anniversary, which is one generation in the ministry.
Sure.
And I was talking to a friend of mine. I said, how do you think Jesus, for 40 years of the most incredible life of raising up generation after generation of young people? And he said, no one's ever carried a cross up Mount Kilimanjaro. Well, I laugh because I'm not a mountain climber. Yeah. I'm not into extreme sports, but yet the Lord laid it on my heart. And so a year ago, I began to train, and on August the 9th, I summited Mount Kilimanjaro at 19,341 feet with a 12-foot high cross, 6 foot wide, to say thank you, Jesus, for 40 years.
And you showed me the picture of it. Maybe we should figure out a way to get that and post it on our Facebook if people want to see it. Now, to be fair, you put a wheel on the back. I mean, Author Blessed, I see, has done that before, so that made some sense. But you go through like 5 climate zones, don't you?
I started in the rainforest, and then you go through 5 climate zones. You end in the Arctic. It was -4 below zero. It took me 7 days, 7 hours, and 38 minutes of climbing. 41 miles to the top. I had a team of 12 that helped me, and we just kept on taking step by step by step.
It just seems
but
so impossible.
The cross has a life of its own, because even on the mountain, no one passed us without stopping us to say, what do you have a cross for?
Oh, sure.
And we got to share the gospel to, I think, 35 countries on the climb up. So God used it in a great way.
Well, if you'd like to know more about that, certainly we have a link to All-Star Ministries. And if you'd like to know more about Walker Moore, he is the man that actually carried a cross to the top of Mount Kilimanjaro. So it's just one of many things you'll learn about him today. But I want to get right into this idea of the orphan heart and the orphan father. Because in some respects, I guess, for a few minutes, Walker, you've got to share your own story, because you talk about how you didn't receive from your father what you needed, and you didn't really realize that this cast kind of a shadow on your own life. Can you explain that?
Well, in John 14:18, Jesus said to the disciples, I will not leave you as an orphan. And I'm going, wait a minute, they're grown men. They're talking to James and John, the sons of thunder, and Peter, the fisherman. And why would he be saying that to them? And I began to explore what Jesus was talking about, and found out that we can have a father, but we still live as orphans in our own father's house. And growing up, I had that experience. My father never spoke into me my identity, worth, or value. Mm-hmm. And I was in the 9 years old, third grade. My dad was a diesel mechanic, and he left one day. And I thought if I could clean his shop up, he would be pleased. My father would be pleased, and he would tell me he pleased. So he left. I went out there and I cleaned every tool up till they shine. I did the bench, and it was like brand new, and the floor was all gunky, and I cleaned it up. And the time I got done, I was covered from top of my head to the bottom of my feet with grease. Yeah. And I saw my father coming in. So I went out and stood beside the toolbox at attention, knowing that he would be pleased. He gets out, he looks at all the tools and the bench and the floor. He finally turns to me and says, it's about time you did something around here, and he walked off. Wow. And I didn't please my father. Yeah. And every boy and every girl is waiting for the father to speak into them their identity and worth and value.
You know, I've been to men's retreats so often where some of the books that have been written on topics similar to that have resonated so much. And I found that there are some men that go, it doesn't really ring my bell, but others, that is so important. They say, have you read this book? Whatever it might be. And I think a lot of it was because they did not have their father's attention. And of course, there are some spiritual implications as well. If you go back and look at the biographies and autobiographies of some of the great atheists over the last 2 centuries, most of them either did not have a good father figure, either an absent father or a defective father. So sometimes your perception of your heavenly father is affected also by your earthly father.
Very much so. In fact, we get our image of our heavenly father from our earthly father. And when the earthly father does not reflect the heavenly father, then we have issues with it. In fact, we have shifted as a culture, up till the 60s. We very much had mom and dad live in the home, grandma and grandpa. Right. You remember the Waltons. And when John Boy got in trouble, grandpa came out and patted him on the head, reminded him of his worth and value. But in the 60s, we rejected the culture, and we said, anybody over 30, don't trust them, and we went off to find ourselves. Right. And also in the 60s produced an orphan generation, not only an orphan individual, but a whole generation that's still out in the 60s looking for their father, looking for identity, for worth and value, and we didn't find it, and we're still struggling with that.
Fascinating book, Escape the Lie, Journey to Freedom from the Orphan Father. We're going to talk about freedom in just a minute, but there's another part of that you talk about in your book, and that is this idea of your voices in your head, and those voices come from different places. Explain that, if you might, for just a minute.
Well, the enemy's always trying to rewire us. I was in Peru, and Tulsa had a huge ice storm. I don't think they have that in Dallas here, but all the trees were bent over and falling on the houses, and the roads were blocked. And I flew home to my house because my house was damaged by the ice storm. And I walked in and our TV was all messed up. I mean, I was watching the Dallas Cowboys and they were wearing pink uniforms and the grass is blue. And my wife said, I think the ice storm has affected our TV. Well, I got out the manual and tried to adjust the hue and the tint and everything. I didn't know how to tell her this, but I think our TV's broken. Every man wants a new TV, bigger, brighter, And as I was looking at the TV, my son walks into the room. He said, hey, Dad, you're home. I said, yeah. He said, while you were gone, I hooked my Xbox up to the television, and I don't think I got the wires hooked up right. And I turned back around, and sure enough, he had and what the enemy's always trying to do is to rewire you and replug you from the day you're born with voices. Now, there are voices from above. These are things that God speaks to us, and voices from below. So those are the voices that how he gets into our lives.
We're going to talk about both of those in just a minute, but we need to take one of those mandatory breaks. And then when we come back, we're going to talk about issues like guilt and shame and identity and purpose and direction and destiny. So many things that are part of this excellent book. 200 pages, Escape the Lie. We have information about it in case you'd like to get a copy. We'll be back with Walker Moore right after this.
The Point of View Commentary with Kerby Anderson.
Is America becoming a police state? Veteran journalist Cheryl Crumley believes that we are and argues that in her book, Police State USA. She's not the sort of journalist to be given to overreaction. She is a full-time writer with the Washington Times. You can find her byline in articles that she has written for the Washington Examiner, Blaze Magazine, American Enterprise Institute, the Heritage Foundation, Human Events, and Town Hall Magazine. She's also a journalism fellow with the Phillips Foundation. America, she says, has become the police state George Orwell envisioned in 1984. In fact, the intrusion into our lives is much greater than he imagined many decades ago because we have much more sophisticated technology than anyone might have predicted. The intrusions range from small things like traffic light cameras to the targeting of particular groups of people. We may roll our eyes at a nanny state that tells us what to eat or be terrified at the militarization of our police force. The threats come in many forms and from many places. A chapter on Big Green Takes the Wheel reminds us of how the EPA, the Department of Interior, and the Justice Department use concern over the environment to crack down on businesses and individuals. A chapter on Big Business Turns Big Brother reminds us that the threats to our privacy and surveillance of citizens isn't just coming from the government. Not only is government mining big data, but businesses are also using this information to gain a competitive edge and intrude into our lives. You know, in previous commentaries, I've talked about threats from drones, data collecting in these secret government centers that collect such data. She also addresses these issues and adds information that should concern citizens. Two of her solutions are to pray and to vote. She believes that a spiritual revival and awakening are necessary in America, and in her chapter on Throw the Bums Out, she makes the case that all of us should vote intelligently for our representatives. We have a responsibility to keep America from becoming a police state. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again in studio with us today, Walker Moore. By the way, if you'd like to see a picture of him carrying the cross up Mount Kilimanjaro, and the one we posted on the Facebook page for Point of View, just go to Point of View Radio Talk Show, and you will see the picture there. I love that one right there because you're so high that all the clouds are beneath you. You've already climbed all the way up, and now you're getting near the top, and it gives you an idea of how indeed long and tedious that must have been, and it had to be absolutely exhausting.
It was. It took everything I had to climb that. I'm not a climber by nature. Somebody said the first mountain you ever climbed was one of the highest in the world, because Mount Kilimanjaro is the highest freestanding mountain in the world.
That's true. Yeah, because you go all the way, like you said, from the kind of rainforest, in terms of the base. Mount Ararat's like that, and some of these others. I mean, when you go to the top of some of these mountains, like Mount Everest, or, of course, a lot of people have been going to the height of Mount McKinley in Alaska, you start high, but here you start really low, and you go all the way to the top. So pretty amazing. So if you'd like to see that picture, we've posted it on the Point of View Radio Talk Show Facebook page, and you can go to our website, pointofview.net. If you'd like to watch the interview that we're doing today, we have the Point of View Livecast, and in just a few minutes, I'll mention again some of the resources we're making available today. But we were talking about the voices in your head. You talk about the voices from above, voices from below. Explain that again, if you might.
Well, you remember the Apostle Peter? Jesus was talking to him, said, "Who do people say that I am?" And he said, "Others." And he said, "Who do you say that I am?" He said, "Thou art the Christ." And then Peter did the happy dance because he had the answer, and Jesus said, "Flesh and blood did not reveal that to you. My Father did." In other words, the thought you had did not come from yourself. In fact, Peter, if you had 1,000 brains and thought for 1,000 years, you would never guess who I am. Yeah. But my Father revealed that to you. Then a few minutes later, he's talking about going to the cross, and Peter rebukes him. He says, stop just talking about the cross and dying. It's disrupting the harmony of the group. And Jesus looks at him and says, "Get behind me, Satan."
Yeah.
And the thought that came into his mind was from below, from Satan.
Yeah.
And every thought above is always in line with the Word of God and the will of God, and every thought below is against God's Word and God's will. So
well said.
That's why I said take every thought captive.
You know, and that's the problem. We live in a culture where we're getting from above and below, but also from the culture itself. And one of the things we mentioned when we promoted this interview today is we live in a really fatherless culture. By that, I mean that, first of all, you have a number of children born into homes where the father is not there. Either he is physically absent or he's emotionally absent. And that is a striking number. And if indeed the orphan heart comes from this idea of a father that has created orphans, this is a epidemic, is it not?
It is. It's worldwide, basically,
yes.
in some ways. Because, you know, an orphan says three things. He says, I don't have a father. I work in orphanage all around the world, and the orphan's going, you know, I'm waiting for my dad to show up, and I'll go to an orphanage in Africa, and little kids will come out yelling, Father, 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 Daddy, 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 and they'll grab my leg, hoping I'm their father. Mm-hmm. And so they say, I have no father. I have no home, because if I had a father, he would come and get me. He wouldn't leave me in this institution, and I have no significance. My father gives me those three things. Right. But since I don't have a father, I have none of those things.
Let's talk about this downward spiral, and again, I'm probably running through quite a bit. It's a 200-page book, and I'm doing the best I can to cover it. But you talk about, first of all, no father, no identity. A lot of people would think, well, no, I sort of know who I am, even though I had such a poor experience with my father, or even I don't know who my father is. But talk through what that is about no father, no identity.
You know, when God created male and female, he imparted his attributes into each one. And when he looked at the female part, he gave feminine attributes to them, and we call that the storge love. It's a Greek word. And every woman has it. You bring a little baby into a room, and every lady go, oh. Yeah. That's the storge sound, you know. But the father is supposed to give identity. And in Genesis, we see that when God shows up at creation, it was a mess. Yeah. And he did two things. He gave it a name. He said, I'm going to call the light day and the night, the dark night. And he gave them names. Then he gave them identity and a significant task. He said, you're going to mark out time. When Adam shows up, what does he do? He names the animals. They were confused who they are. I don't know who I am. Yeah. And it's supposed to be the job of the man to speak identity and significance into a child. But because of the fall, we don't do that anymore. We speak into ourselves. Every man is a puffer, and he speaks into himself. And, you know, we'll have these little contests. Well, I got a 4-wheeler. Well, I got a 6-wheeler. Well, I got an 18-wheeler. You know, I got a 24-wheeler out there. And every man tries to speak into himself his own identity. And what we're wanting is our Father to speak into us. So if you have no Father, you have no identity.
Very good. So again, no father, no identity. Let's take the next one. No identity, no purpose. How does identity relate to our purpose?
Well, very, very close to that. If you're, and again, in Genesis, when he gave it a name, identity, then he gave it a purpose. We call it a significant task sometimes. We see that in life. Every little kid wants a significant, can I help? Can I help? You know, and he wants to help. When my young son was 3 years old, we got an old car, and the transmission was leaking, so I was underneath my car working on it, and my young son leaned down and said, Dad, can I help? Yeah. And I said, scoot on in here. And he did, and grease dripped on him, and he held a screwdriver for me, and my wife walks by. He goes, Mom, look, I'm helping Dad, you know. And he was covered of grease, and what happened is, because he had an identity, then he had a purpose. His purpose was helping his father. Jesus, at 12 years old, when they found the temple, what does he says? I'm out doing what? My Father's business. He knew who he was. He had identity. Once you had identity, out of that comes a purpose for your life.
Oh, very, very good. All part of the book, Escape the Lie, A Journey to Freedom from the Orphan Heart. We've talked about no father, no identity. The second one, no identity, no purpose. I might as well keep it going. No purpose, no direction. That one probably makes a little more sense, I think, Walker, for some of our listeners, because you recognize if you really don't know what you're here for, you don't know what your purpose is, you don't know what your direction is. And so that is, I think, absolutely key in understanding this downward spiral that comes from this idea of an orphan heart.
But when you know your purpose, like if you feel called to be a doctor, or you know, then you know you have to go to college and medical school and residency and all those kind of things you have a direct. But you know, what happens if you don't know what your purpose is in life? Why you're created? Who created you, and why do you exist? Then you're always kind of mobiling around and trying to find yourself, and you go from this to this to this, and it's just a really confusing time. And finally, you just settle for anything that comes along.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of where we are today. There is just an aimlessness about our society where if individuals don't know who they are and they don't know what their purpose is, they aren't certainly going to follow any kind of direction. And that kind of relates back to your own ministry. You're really trying to help young people grow up. And until they know who their identity is and then they figure out how that may be their purpose, they're not going to have any kind of direction in life.
Well, first of all, this whole thing of adolescence or teenage years is one of the biggest lies out there next to the orphan heart, because Jesus was never a teenager.
Yeah.
The word teenager was not coined until 1941, April edition of Popular Science magazine. Before 1941, April Fool's Day, there was no such thing. When I was growing up, we weren't teenagers. We were the young people, or we were the intermediate department in our church, but we were not called teenagers. And all of a sudden, this whole world has embraced this thing that is not biblical. They called teenagers or adolescent. Jesus said, I thought as a child, spoke as a child, put away childish thing, and I became an adult. And there need to be a closure to their childhood. Every child needs to be closed down and move into adulthood, take on adult responsibility and adult consequences.
You know, and I've pointed that out before because there's both the biological and cultural reasons for why we have this idea of teen years and young adult years, because it used to be that, first of all, a young woman's first period would be 3 years later than it is now. Mm-hmm. And that would then be closer to, say, the age of 16. The age of first marriage was 16 to 18, so there was really no gap. You were either a child or you were an adult. But now, because of health and maybe hormones and everything else, it's 3 years earlier than it was, around 13. And the age of first marriage sometimes is 27.
Yes.
So as a result, you've got this gap in here that never really existed, both because of biology and culture. And so you have the teen years, and then you have the failure to launch problems and all the things that we've talked about before in youth ministry.
So what we do is we provide a way for parents to join us to close down their children's childhood. And you must have read my book, Rite of Passage Parenting, because I say those exact same things in there. Yeah. And that since the day they're born, you need to start casting into them, there's going to be a closure to their childhood. And every child has that put in them by God to get that closed down. Every little girl dresses up in mom little high heels and walks around and tries to be like mommy. And every little boy wants to help dad mow the lawn. And there's a season to capture this movement from childhood to adulthood. And it's usually around, 10, 11, 12, 13 years of age. And they're wanting this father to take them across the line. But we say, no, go play video games. No, you can't, Well, I was growing up. I can't remember when I started driving. I lived on a farm, and I had to drive the truck for my dad as he put bales on the back of the truck. And I was, anytime I could step up to an adult job, it was there. Yeah. But this generation cannot do that. And so we give them a significant task of going to the mission field and preaching the gospel in unreached cultures.
We'll talk more about All-Star Ministries in just a minute, but I think it also illustrates that point once again. I might add a political reason, too, because now we don't let young people work. I mean, my wife grew up on a farm and picked strawberries and all. Now it's child labor laws, can't do any of that, so we just don't give them an opportunity to grow up. So we have this extended adolescence problem, and I know I'm preaching to the choir, so we'll come back. And let me open up the phones. Already we've talked about everything from this idea of an orphan heart to fatherlessness, but we've also got into this kind of the myth of the teen years. And if you'd like to join us, we'd love to get your phone calls, 1-800-351-1212. We'll come back and talk about this downward spiral from the orphan heart right after these important messages.
You are listening to Point of View. For materials offered during the program, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number, 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation in studio with Walker Moore, and if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll take some of those phone calls in just a minute. Walker is here in large part because you have students coming back from their trip, and about 100. You had 100 before. I understand you've had, about 13,000 students you've taken to the mission field in 49. Now it's going to be 50 countries. That's pretty amazing.
It is. We've just been blessed to see so many students who embrace their adulthood on this rite of passage journey. And they go for 5 weeks learning how to take on the lifestyle of an adult, because where else are you going to learn? Mm-hmm. We have no school. Come here and learn how to be adult. But yet they're dying to become adult. They want to become adult. This generation has chosen one thing as their rite of passage. And, people say, what's that? Well, it's tattooing.
Yeah.
Because, when you're young, you can't write on your own skin. Your parents will wash it off and say, don't you do that again. My mom used to spit and use a washcloth. Don't you write it? And this generation, look at me. I'm an adult now, master of my own skin. Look at here. And they'll just put a little tattoo. I mean, these are believers, unbelievers. This whole generation, tattooing has become the rite of passage for them to show the world they're an adult.
We have really no way to say that you're an adult. I mean, it used to be maybe that you get a driver's license or that you could buy a legal drink or something like that. And so I think this idea of rite of passage, very important. Rite of passage parenting is something you've been writing about for some time. And people can find out a lot more about that at our All-Star Ministries. And we have that link on the website. Let's, just before we go any further in your book, let's take a phone call here, and we'll go to Bob in California, listening on KYCC. Bob, thank you for calling today.
Hey, thanks for taking my call. I'll go quick as I can. I've recently gone through a divorce. I have 4 boys. My 16-year-old, I wasn't a very good dad for a long time, and my younger ones and I have bonded pretty good, but my 16-year-old and I have, we just can't seem to get it together. He's very locked into video games. And so I'm wondering, how do I, without coming across as bossy old dad or controlling, how do you think I rekindle that relationship that has been so badly damaged?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that you can do is what a child is like a checkbook. In fact, my bank says I have to make more deposits than withdrawals.
Yes.
I don't know why they have that law, but they have it, and they think I need to make most rebellion from teenagers, especially young men, is because they have been taken out of, they've been withdrawals and not deposits put into them. Mm-hmm. So I would sit down, and we call it the checkbook theory. We look them in the eye, and I would say to my son, I admire you because. Mm-hmm. Because is the cha-chink word that makes a deposit into a spirit and a soul of a young man. And if you say, if I tell my wife, she's beautiful, my wife goes, yeah, you have to say that, you're married to me. But if I say you're beautiful because I love the way your hair surrounds your face and brings out your eyes, she goes, oh, and a young man that same way. I said, my son, you're a good son. My son said, no, you don't know what I did yesterday. I hit my little brother and I did this. Mm-hmm. But I say, you're a good son because, you've helped me around the house and I didn't even ask you to do it. And you have just been proactive in doing things. And I admire you for that. And I respect you for that. So one of the things that you need to do is sit down looking, number 1, eye to eye. Number 2, use his name. And number 3, use the because word, because the because is the deposit into him. And you can't move him forward until you have his spirit account filled up enough to make that withdrawal. Anytime you move a child to correction or to anything, it's a withdrawal. So I would suggest that you would spend some time, and I know he's going to go, just stupid, But you begin to do that, I guarantee you it will make a difference in his life.
That's really helpful. Bob, I hope that you would find out a little bit more about the ministry that Walker Moore has. And certainly you could benefit from his previous book that we've talked about, The Rite of Passage Parenting. And of course, we're talking about this one, Escape the Lie. Just before I take another phone call, let's work our way down that spiral. We talked about no father, no identity. Then we talked about no identity, no purpose. Then the next one, we talked about no purpose, no direction. Well, we have a few more because you talk about also no direction, no destiny. People, if they tell me, Walker, what their decisions are, I'll tell them what their destiny is. If I know your decisions, I know your destiny. But if you don't know where you're going, I know you won't end up anywhere. Right?
Exactly right. Because I was coming to the studio today. I was trying to find it. I had a destiny, and I had to work to get here. But, USA Today did a survey with senior adults, and it was a high percentage, 90-some% said they didn't know if they ever arrived to what they're supposed to do in life.
Isn't that amazing?
And I'm going, how tragic is that to live all your life, and if you don't know you accomplished something like, were you supposed to do in life? Did you complete your purpose in life?
Yes. So again, the idea, no direction and no destiny. A lot of people never really understand their calling in life. They never understand how God has uniquely gifted them with gifts and abilities and experiences, and yet every person on this planet is unique. I mean, even if you're an identical twin, your twin is different than you in all sorts of ways. And so I think one of the great challenges, in the Christian life is really to understand who you are and what God intends to use in your life. And that's why I'm so thrilled that you're catching these young people before they are completely perverted by the culture or begin to stumble into things that aren't going to be helpful to them, and help them really understand. Because the enemy wants
to rewire them through the music, through movies, through friends, through the media, the enemy's out there trying to rewire that picture. So your life is fuzzy. You don't know what your destination is. And yet we know Jesus had all those things. Did Jesus know his Father? Of course he did. Yeah. He said over and over, I know who my Father is. Did he know his identity? He said, yeah, I am. I've come and I know my purpose and I know my direction. I know my destiny. It is finished, he says. Jesus had all these things, but an orphan does not.
Wow.
And there's a downward spiral. When you start saying, I have no father, then you begin to, and when I say you have no father, what you're really saying that I don't matter to God. That's, he's there, but I don't matter to him.
We talked about this downward spiral. Let's finish that off because we talked about no father, no identity, no purpose, no direction, no destiny. One last one, no destiny, no life. And that's sort of already alluded to that, but talk about that concept as well.
Well, Jesus said, I come to give life and life abundantly. Life is not living. Life is when we walk in sync with the way the Creator created us. And the creation and the Creator comes together within the same purpose, and we walk that out, we have life. I was teaching one weekend, and I taught like 20 times from Friday night till Sunday night. And I came home, my wife said, oh, you worked so hard. Sit down here. Let me give you something to drink. I said, I didn't work at all. I had a 21st one to go, and they made me get on the plane. I was enjoying life and life abundantly because I was walking in sync way the Creator created me.
Yeah.
And that brings life and life abundantly.
And again, another survey out of USA Today, most people hate their jobs. Most people don't know why they're in that job. Most people don't have any purpose in their job, and they certainly do not get excited. They come home and they're exhausted. And yet if you're working within your giftedness, your sweet spot, as I like to sometimes say, it doesn't seem like work, and it's hard to believe you can get paid for doing what you're doing.
We call it your dominion. There's two things to life. There's dominion and your duty. Dominion, and when you walk in sync with the Creator, your duty is, well, for me, it's mowing my lawn. Yeah. I hate mowing my lawn. I don't like mowing my lawn. My wife finally has to say, I think the kid is lost in the grass out there. Don't you? You ought to mow it, And so I go out and mow. It's not my dominion, but it's the Lord says I need to do everything as unto the Lord. So we have to teach young people to find out what their dominion is.
Right.
And then do their duties as unto the Lord. Many pastor has lost a ministry because they didn't do their duties very well. Mm-hmm. Their dominion is preaching and teaching, but they didn't take care of finances, or they didn't take care of business in the church, and wasn't very. Sure. And they lose their ministry. So you have to do your dominion and your duty both as unto the Lord.
How would you encourage people to use this book? When we come back, I want to talk about redeemed, reclaimed, renewed, and restored. But before we get to that, it does seem to me that this could be something that somebody that's saying, Walker, you were talking about my life. I have felt like I have never really had an identity, a purpose, and a direction. Individuals certainly could read this, but it strikes me that this could be a book that could be even part of a small group discussion, don't you think?
In fact, there is now even a small group study guide online that they can get from Randall House Publishing. It's free. They can download it, they get on there and use it. But yeah, we already have small groups going of people looking at and discovering. Because, you know, a lot of people say, I'm not an orphan. And then all of a sudden you start reading the Orphan Heart book or Escape the Lie, and they go, oh, there's an area in my life I need God to do a work. I did not know I was an orphan in this area of my life. I need help. So
that's very good. The book is entitled Escape the Lie, Journey to Freedom from the Orphan Heart. And if you'd like to know a little bit more, it is available on our website. And we also have a link to All-Star Ministries. We've talked a little bit about that. If you're fascinated by this idea of rite of passage parenting, which is something he's been writing about for many years, and it's also part of his book, The Rite of Passage Parenting, 4 Essential Experiences to Equip Your Kids for Life. That's a book published by Thomas Nelson. This one, Escape the Lie. We also have information about it on our website, and most importantly, I would encourage you to contact them through All-Star Ministries and find out, maybe if you got a young person that's needing to understand who he or she might be and might benefit from going to the mission field, that's a great ministry opportunity as well. We'll come back and talk about these 4 very important principles right after these important messages.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome more with us for just a few more minutes as we talk about his book, Escape the Lie. And we'll also want to talk about what is on the website, All-Star Ministries. But just before we get to that, one of the themes that runs through your book, and that's why I sort of skipped over it because it sort of shows up in different chapters, is the issue of guilt and shame. Help us understand how that pulls us away from our identity, our purpose, and our destiny.
You know, Jesus wants to set you free, but the enemy wants to put you in bondage. Mm-hmm. And he does it in 2 fantastic ways. One is through guilt. Well, guilt makes you, you have this guilty feelings, but he wants to move you from guilt to shame. Guilt will make you hang your head, but shame keeps you from lifting it up again.
Yeah.
And shame ties you to the past. And the enemy says, your God can't take care of the past, and you have to carry that shame yourself. And you walk through life and you drag it like an anchor off a boat, and you try to move forward in your life, but the shame keeps you tied to the past. Then what he wants you to do is to be tied to the future through worry. And so what about tomorrow? I don't know what to do. There's no hope, and he wants to tie you to the future, saying your God can't take care of the future. So the orphan says, my God can't take care of the past. My God can't take care of the future. So what does that mean today? My God can't take care of the day. I am helpless. I'm an orphan without a father that can do anything in my life today. That is the lie that you need to break. He took care of the past. He took your sins as far as the east and the west and then buried in the deepest sea. He said, don't worry about tomorrow. I got it in hand. I got it in check there. You be free today, my child, and you dance and enjoy life.
The last few chapters of your book talk about redeemed, reclaimed, renewed, and restored. We won't have a chance to go through each one of those. And besides, I want people to read the book and glean out of those chapters some of the great things you talked about.
That's my favorite part of the book. You get to the answer.
Yeah, but let's talk about that answer for just a minute. You've already sort of alluded to that. We are redeemed, and that's what has happened in the past, but also reclaimed. Explain how that all comes together so that we really can journey to freedom from the orphan heart.
Well, there's three ways you can belong to a family. You could be married to a family, you could be born into a family, and you could be adopted to a family. And God loves us so much that he's taken care of all three. I think this is incredible that he wants you in his family so much. He said you must be born again. Yeah. We are adopted according to Ephesians, and he says in Revelation there's going to be a wedding taking place. He's going to come back and get his bride. And he loves us so much, he took care of all three ways. But the enemy wants us to think we're the adopted child, that we don't have fullness or full right. And the good news in John 17:23, the one that changed me from the orphan heart to living life and life abundantly was this. It says in John 17:23 that God sent Jesus, so one, I know he's from the Father, and second, that God the Father loves me as much as he does Jesus.
Yes.
I go, no, that can't be
That's
right.
amazing.
That seems almost self-serving, that. But God, it says that he loves, how much does he love you? He's his favorite child. Mm-hmm. And God says, who do you think you are?
Yeah.
And I says, I'm your favorite child too? He goes, yes. And all of a sudden I realized, and what my Father could not do, my Heavenly Father did. And he spoke into me my worth and value and said, this is my son who I'm well pleased to me, and you're my favorite child.
Yeah, perfect. You also talk about being renewed and restored, because some people feel like, well, I look at all the things that have happened in the past. Okay, maybe I get over my shame. But there is a sense in which God can redeem and even restore what the locusts have taken away. True?
Oh, very much so. He comes to give life and life abundantly. No matter what your life has been, no matter how bad or what you've done, there is nothing that can stop him from restoring that joy. In fact, we call it the awe factor in the scriptures, and says the very first church in Acts, the second chapter, says they devoted themselves to apostles, teaching, fellowship, breaking bread, and prayer, and they continue with a sense of awe. And that's that freedom of when you and God gets back in sync again, and you walk in that awe of God.
Let's, if we can, just before I let you go, talk about what is available on your website, Awe Star Ministries, because you have a video that people can watch about Kilimanjaro and some other things. You also, of course, have the Global Student Mission Trips. And that is something that I think some of our listeners might want to consider if they have a young person that really needs to understand what it means to be an adult.
Yeah, we partner with churches and pastors and parents from all across the United States that we say to them, let us do the rite of passage event. The rite of passage is a series of things. First of all, you cast it into them as a child that they're going to be an event. Jesus spent 3 days without his parents. Remember when they left, Mary and Joseph went off? I can't imagine this. Mary and Joseph went off and left Jesus behind in Jerusalem. And it says he decided to stay back in Jerusalem, and his parents were unaware of it. He did not tell them. And they get a day down the road, and Mary gets that sixth sense of all mothers. Where's my son? Where's my son?
Yeah.
Well, they can't go back that day because it's nighttime. And I always ask parents, what do you think Mary did all night long? And they said, I think she prayed. I said, how do you pray that prayer? Dear Jesus, dear God, I lost your only son.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
And she go back, but he found him in the temple, and what was he doing? He was listening, which is the number one adult ability. Number one skill, Jesus, he listened. He was asking questions, which to be an adult, you got to learn to listen and ask questions. And then he said, I was doing my Heavenly Father's business, a significant task. So what we do, we take these young people on this journey for 5 weeks into Peru, Panama, Ethiopia, all around the world. And they go on a 5-week journey of learning to take on adult skills in their lives.
And again, if people would like to know more about that, maybe watch a video or contact you, how can they do so?
They can contact us at on the web course at www.allstar, A-W-E. A lot of people think it's all, but it's awe, as the awe of God, str.org, or 1-800-ALL-STAR, A-W-E-S-T-R is our telephone number. But we're all in Dallas right now. We'll be back in the office till Monday, so write it down or just send us an email on our website. And you can contact me there, walker@allstar.org, and we'll respond to you.
Well, I just mentioned that we do have a link to the website there, and there's a contact button there, but also you can see a little bit about some of the trips. There are forms and various apps and resources and ways in which you can support the ministry and find out a little bit more. So I just am thrilled that instead of talking to you by phone, we had a chance to get you in studio today, and that GPS worked, and you actually found your destiny and ended up here today. Wasn't that good?
And I'm having life right now, so life abundantly. So
good. Well, Walker, thanks for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me.
If you just joined us, I hope that you'll go back and listen to the broadcast, because it is a very good interview on his book, Escape the Lie, Journey to Freedom from the Orphan Heart. And we have that information available on our website, pointofview.net. We also have an interview that he did a while back, and so you can watch that and read that. And of course, we have the link to the ministry as well. As we're talking about these young people, yesterday, you might remember we had a conversation about the millennial generation, those born between 1980 and 2000. A lot of people that Walker's ministering to right now. And one of the things we made available yesterday, and we're going to make available again today, is an older article that we produced in our Outlook magazine on reaching the generation millennial. And we have a section on the millennial generation and who they are and what they believe and how they're being influenced today by the culture and the media. And then a separate section here on born-again millennials, and a lot of that relates to the survey we talked about yesterday done by Probe Ministries and the Barna Group about those born-again millennials. And it's very interesting because we're talking about these individuals who at least claimed to be born again, had a born-again experience that was meaningful in their life, but yet, as we heard yesterday when Steve Cable was in studio, a lot of them, in terms of their biblical views or their biblical practices, certainly were not following that. So one of the things we would also like to make available to you today is this article, a series of articles on the millennial generation. And if you just contact us here at Point of View, we'll be glad to send that to you. If you want more information on all the things we've talked about over the last couple of days, it's all available at our website, pointofview.net. You can click on the button there that says Escape the Lie, and you can find out about the book. If you'd like to know about the interview we did yesterday, that's available there as well. And as you go to the website, we have a link to our Facebook page. That's where you can see Walker climbing up Mount Kilimanjaro. You can click on the podcast if you'd like to listen to this again, or maybe dub it down on a CD and pass it on to someone else. That's certainly available to you. If you hit the This Week button, there's a search engine so that you can find any of the interviews we've done here on Point of View, and we're glad to make those available to you on a regular basis. One of the things I've encouraged some of you to do, and I've heard many of you starting to do that, is to click on that button that says Get Involved. We always, every single day, send you all the information before the interviews. So today, for example, you would have in your inbox all the links to All-Star and Walker Moore, as well as the Escape the Lie book and all of that, and we'd be glad to send that to you. If you've ever heard my commentary, my 2-minute commentary, we can send that to you as well. You click on those buttons and click those buttons that you want, and we certainly will make sure that that is sent to you. And finally, there's, of course, a donate button. We are dependent upon your financial gifts to bring programs like this to you. So all of it available at the website, pointofview.net. Let's take a break. We'll come back and talk about some of the issues in the news right after these important messages.
Across the nation, this is Point of View. For materials offered during the broadcast, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries and is supported by your generous tax-deductible contributions.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, we're going to spend some time talking about guns, gun control, and the Second Amendment. And if you've ever listened to this program, you know from time to time I will sometimes quote from Dr. Joyce Malcolm because of the work that she's done in the past about the history of the Second Amendment. She's been quoted by the Supreme Court and others. And when I found out recently that she was available for an interview, I said, well, let's see if we can get her on the program. We're delighted to welcome her to the program. She is a professor at George Mason School of Law, actually the Patrick Henry Professor of Constitutional Law and the Second Amendment. I mentioned the fact that from time to time on Second Amendment issues, she's quoted. I remember in the Heller decision that was won out of the District of Columbia, she was quoted. She has previously taught at places like Princeton University and Boston University, Northeastern University, Cambridge University, has a PhD from Brandeis University. And I thought we might talk a little bit about not only the history of the Second Amendment, that comes from her book, To Keep and Bear Arms, but also one about the issue of British gun control in her book, Guns and Violence. So, Dr. Malcolm, a delight to have you on the program with us today.
Well, thank you for inviting me. Pleasure to be with you.
We have posted one interview that was done. Actually, it's a book review. I think it was done by David Koppel, calling you the gold standard of gun control. So you certainly
did really?
It. And also, we have posted one of your videos so that people could watch you as well. And we certainly have a link to some other resources that would be helpful, including your own website. So let's, if we can, see if we can split it half and half. But I'd love for just a minute to remind our listeners why we have a Second Amendment. And in your book, To Keep and Bear Arms, you kind of take us through the Anglo-American right. And there was a sense in which this was not some afterthought, but the framers of the Constitution, looking even at the founders of our country, understood how important an armed citizenry was as a check and balance to a government. Isn't that true?
Yes. I mean, they had... Since 1689, there was a British Bill of Rights, English Bill of Rights, which was passed actually about a century before ours. And it included a right for Protestant subjects, who were something like 90% of the population, to have arms for their defense. And it meant personal defense. It did not mean that you had to be a member of the militia.
Right.
People were to be in the militia if they were the right age to defend the country, but that didn't mean that was why they had firearms.
And I think it illustrates again, and I'm sure you roll your eyes sometimes, but it illustrates again when you hear people say, well, guns are for hunting or something of that nature, or for the militia. But if you go back and look, as you point out, citizens were expected to maybe have those arms and recognize that that was one more check on an expansive government. So when our framers came to establish our Constitution, they recognized there were all sorts of checks and balances. We have three branches of government. We have a federal government that has certain rights delegated to it. Other rights are reserved to the states and the people. Later on, they added the Bill of Rights, and the First Amendment, of course, gave the freedom of speech and press and other things. But the Second Amendment was not an add-on. They understood that that would be a very important check on the expansion of governmental power, didn't they?
Yes, it meant that ultimately, if all your other rights were taken away, that the people would have the resource to get them back. So it was both for personal self-defense, and it was also to be able to have the people defend their rights should the government ever become tyrannical.
And it seems to me that they also understood this is an important issue, because you could almost say that gun control was one of the things that led to the shot heard around the world, because if indeed you look at the battles of Concord and Lexington, did that not have something to do with the attempts of the British to take arms away from the Americans?
Oh, yeah. The commander in Boston had sent the troops out to Lexington and Concord, particularly Concord, to destroy or take away the weapons that were being amassed there. Actually, the folks in that area, the Minutemen and their supporters, were amassing weapons for an army that they hoped would be about 15,000 people. So they not only had personal weapons, they actually ended up somehow getting 3 cannon as well.
It's pretty amazing what they did. Let's, if we can, then talk about the militia issue. That surfaced, of course, in the Heller decision, and I hear progressives all the time say, well, yeah, the Second Amendment only applies to a militia, but private citizens aren't part of the militia. They're not part of the National Guard. They're certainly not, and all the rest of those kinds of arguments. How would you help kind of clarify some of the misconceptions that people have there?
Well, the militia were meant to be the total population who were sort of, maybe 16 to 60 at first, and then I think they sort of defined it down to 18 to 45. But basically it was not confined to the National Guard or anything like that. They would not have felt the National Guard was the militia, because the militia was not meant to be under the control of the government.
Yeah.
The militia were your citizen soldiers, and there was a very strong feeling that they would never betray the rights of their neighbors, whereas there was a lot of suspicion about professional armies who were under the control of the executive.
And so, again, I think you have the idea there that these were private citizens, and it seems to me that for many years the Supreme Court really didn't rule on whether or not the Second Amendment applied just to individuals or whether it applied to militia. But, I'm kind of a simple man. You don't know me very well, but it seems to me that if the First Amendment gives you as an individual the right of free speech, it gives you as an individual the right of freedom of assembly, gives you the right as an individual of freedom of press, to then say that these individual rights in the First Amendment weren't intended in the Second Amendment does seem to be a little bit of a judicial stretch, don't you think?
Oh, it is. In fact, the people who claim that it's just a so-called collective right, in other words, we all have it, but no one of us has it,
right,
try to interpret the phrase, the right of the people, only in regard to the Second Amendment as being a sort of collective right. So in the First Amendment and the Fourth Amendment, other amendments, it's an individual right, but somehow or other in the Second Amendment they see it as a so-called collective right. And, it's hard to think of a collective right that isn't also an individual right.
That's for sure. And just before we take a break, I think this relates to what we're going to see in this particular campaign, because you have, for example, the former mayor of New York City, as well as many individuals running for the United States Senate and Congress and others that still seem to want to, in some way or another, limit the rights of individuals to keep and bear arms. I would think that at least some of the Supreme Court decisions and other court decisions now have clarified that, but what do you think is the possibility that we're going to have to continue to fight this battle both in the courts and in the legislature?
I think we're going to have to continue to fight it. They don't seem to want to recognize the scope of the Supreme Court opinions, 2 opinions, one for Washington, D.C.'s gun law, and then the second incorporating the Second Amendment to all the states and cities from overturning Chicago's. Those were really 2 very clear opinions, and they don't want to accept them.
Well, we're talking today with Dr. Joyce Malcolm, and if you'd like to join our conversation, calls already coming in. I will open up the phones, 1-800-351-1212. We come back, though, we want to talk just briefly, before we take some of your phone calls, about her book, Guns and Violence, The English Experience. She sort of predicted that. I think they called it a Malcolm moment when that actually unfolded. So we'll talk about that with her and give you some more perspective, because we've had sort of a social experiment that's been taking place in the UK. Hasn't turned out so well. We'll talk about that with her and you right after this.
The Point of View Commentary with Kerby Anderson.
Is America becoming a police state? Veteran journalist Cheryl Crumley believes that we are and argues that in her book, Police State USA. She's not the sort of journalist to be given to overreaction. She is a full-time writer with the Washington Times. You can find her byline in articles that she has written for the Washington Examiner, Blaze Magazine, American Enterprise Institute, the Heritage Foundation, Human Events, and Town Hall Magazine. She's also a journalism fellow with the Phillips Foundation. America, she says, has become the police state George Orwell envisioned in 1984. In fact, the intrusion into our lives is much greater than he imagined many decades ago because we have much more sophisticated technology than anyone might have predicted. The intrusions range from small things like traffic light cameras to the targeting of particular groups of people. We may roll our eyes at a nanny state that tells us what to eat or be terrified at the militarization of our police force. The threats come in many forms and from many places. A chapter on Big Green Takes the Wheel reminds us of how the EPA, the Department of Interior, and the Justice Department use concern over the environment to crack down on businesses and individuals. A chapter on Big Business Turns Big Brother reminds us that the threats to our privacy and surveillance of citizens isn't just coming from the government. Not only is government mining big data, but businesses are also using this information to gain a competitive edge and intrude into our lives. You know, in previous commentaries, I've talked about threats from drones, data collecting in the secret government centers that collect such data. She also addresses these issues and adds information that should concern citizens. Two of her solutions are to pray and to vote. She believes that a spiritual revival and awakening are necessary in America, and in her chapter on Throw the Bums Out, she makes the case that all of us should vote intelligently for our representatives. We have a responsibility to keep America from becoming a police state. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have with us for just a little bit longer Dr. Joyce Malcolm, professor of George Mason School of Law, Patrick Henry Professor of Constitutional Law and Second Amendment, and certainly is an individual that's written on so many different topics. I want to continue our conversation with her for a few more minutes, and then we'll open up the phones because I know many of you have comments about the issue of gun control and the Second Amendment. But I would love to quote from your book for just a few minutes, if we could, Dr. Malcolm, Guns and Violence, the English Experience. And really, if you go back a few centuries, I guess it was the 1689 Bill of Rights, the right to bear arms existed in England, and there was really no gun control. So maybe we can fast forward a little bit to the Firearms Act. And I wanted to cover this for just a few minutes because not only is it important in terms of history, it gives us a real understanding of what would happen if indeed those who want gun control, what it would look like in America, because we've had a social experiment taking place in the UK, haven't we?
Yes, we have. I mean, this first real gun control act there was passed right after World War I, when there was a lot of worry about a Bolshevik revolution in Britain, and it meant that you had to register a gun. You had to go to the police,
right,
and the police had to say you were a fit person to have a gun and had a good reason to have it. And so it seemed reasonable enough at the time. But even right at the beginning, to have a good reason to have a gun, you had to live in a lonely place or be part of the government. So right away it was more restrictive, but people didn't realize that. And in Britain, the Home Office is in charge of the police throughout the country, and they produced a series of secret documents classified over the years, tightening what the restrictions were for having a good reason to have a gun. This was never debated in Parliament, never made public. And by 1969, it was never a good reason to have a gun for self-defense, or even for a bank to have someone armed to protect the valuables. So they had actually ratcheted down the reason a person could have a gun. And then in 1953, when juvenile delinquency was the big issue, they passed an act that deprived ordinary people of any right to carry any weapon that would be regarded as an offensive weapon in a public place.
Yes.
And an offensive weapon was anything you might use to protect yourself. So if you were carrying a walking stick with the idea that you were going to hit someone if they attacked you, then that was an offensive weapon and you were not allowed to have it. And again, that's been used over and over again to prosecute otherwise law-abiding people. There was an American who defended herself in the subway there with a small pocket knife. And, you know, when she reported to the police she'd been attacked, they immediately arrested her for having this offensive weapon. Even chemical sprays are considered offensive weapons. So everyone is to rely upon the government to protect you. And, of course, the government can't possibly protect everybody all the time.
One of the things that you point out in the book is just the fact that home invasions, probably the greatest fear of any American citizen. What happens when somebody knocks down the door, and do I have enough time to find a weapon to prevent that from taking place? Well, if indeed you were a law-abiding citizen in Great Britain, you'd have to have one safe that has a gun, another safe that has the ammunition. To think of what it would take to open one safe, then open the other safe and load the gun. You can see that that's never going to happen. And it would seem to me that that really has emboldened robbers and muggers and other individuals, because home invasion statistics are much higher in the UK than they are in the U.S.
Yes, and they actually prefer people to be at home, because then their security systems are off and they can't do them any harm. The law will not allow the homeowner to actually harm the intruder. So if, you know, you shot the person, you would be brought to court for, you know, attempted murder. And they know that. And so there actually have been instances where, you know, an intruder has sat down with the people and said, look, if you hurt me, you're going to be in trouble.
Yes.
So it's just completely backward. I mean, they seem to have forgotten that the police are there to protect the innocent person.
Now, I mentioned just as we were going to the break, did they not refer to when the violence just broke out in the streets at UK as the Malcolm moment or something like that?
Oh, yes, somebody did. Well, because
you predicted
I had predicted.
Yes.
Which historians don't usually like to do, but I had predicted that this route they were taking of disarming the public was going to lead to, you know, rioting against people. And at that time, the public would have no way of protecting themselves. I mean, not only are you supposed to rely on the government to protect you, but the government has decided it's expensive to incarcerate people, so they should have short sentences, and anyway, prison doesn't rehabilitate, so let's let them out to do community service. And so they have a much lower rate of incarceration. People serve only half of their sentence if they are committed to prison. And one of the recent commissioners of prisons said that he wasn't going to build any more space in prisons unless prisons could show a better rate of rehabilitation. So they've got all of these folks out who've committed crime, and then if you're under 18, you won't be sent to prison at all. They just, you know, it isn't even a revolving door. They're just out in the street most of the time. And so a good number of those people who were rioting were people who had been brought before the courts time and again, but were never really seriously punished.
Yeah, and let's just talk about that for a minute. Let's go inside the mind of a typical criminal. If I'm in the UK, I have a very low expectation. I might even say a no expectation, but we'll just call it a low expectation of confronting a victim with a firearm. Now, that is a very different world than going into a home knowing full well that particular homeowner might be packing, don't you think?
Yes, there's a survey of American prisoners who said that they were more afraid of armed homeowners than they were of the police.
Yes.
And I can well believe that. I think that their fear is right, whereas in Britain that they're not afraid of people being home, nor are they afraid of the police interfering either. So,
Just
people
amazing.
get robbed over and over again. It's very frightening.
We're going to take a lot of phone calls after you leave, but I wanted to take this one because it had to do with statistics, and since you certainly have been looking at some of those, let me take one phone call while you're still with us, and that is to go to California, KYCC. Chris, you're on with Dr. Joyce Malcolm.
Hi, how you guys doing today?
Very good. What was your question?
Well, I've talked to you before, Kerby, and I've told you I'm a stats guy, and I wanted to know, I looked online to find a good site for finding some stats on, crime rate in areas that are, gun-friendly and those that are not. And you can find all kinds of stuff, but I wanted to find out if there was one that was better than another, if you've done your own stats, because it seems like you look at like Chicago, they got, the tighter gun laws and the crime there is, absolutely horrible.
The District of Columbia. We've talked about a little of that with Dr. John Lott, but I'd love to find out from you, Dr. Joyce Malcolm, places where people could go to find some of those facts and figures, because we have quite an activist audience, and I'm sure they'd like to post things on their Facebook page or write letters to the editor, maybe write articles. Where would you suggest people go for some of that information?
Well, Dr. Lott has started a new center, Crime Research Institute, and he's been publishing some statistics. He's an economist, so as you know, he's that's his expertise. But you'll find these, scattered about. There's a wonderful map of the states that now have shall issue concealed carry laws, and it actually shows in different colors how which states are and a concealed carry where they must issue a concealed carry license. And there are apparently over 11 million people who have these certificates now across the country. And one statistic that I'll just give you that Dr. Lott came up with was that there are now more than 11 million people that have these shall issue concealed carry certificates. And the other thing is, of course, that and this is just my statistic, but you'll find it everywhere. The last 20 years, that the murder rate in this country has gone down by about half. Well, the number of guns has shot up precipitously every time there's a threat to restrict firearms, that people go out and buy them. And one statistic from Professor Lott, and that is that he writes that between 2007 and 2013, the murder rate declined just between those few years by 22%, while the concealed carry permits went up by 130%.
Interesting.
We should realize, though, that it's very hard to get an exact number of the number of firearms because they're not all registered. So all we know is the firearms where people have gotten a background check, and the FBI publishes those. So you could get some FBI figures. One thing, though, that the FBI in figuring homicides puts down as a homicide every suspected murder. And some of these may be self-defense, some of these may be suicides. So the number that they put down is as high as it could possibly be.
Is not the best. Let me just mention, just before I let you go, that we do have a link to your website, joyceleemalcolm.com, and, of course, your new book, Peter's War, A New England Slave Boy and the American Revolution. We'd certainly want to encourage people to get that book, as well as To Keep and Bear Arms, The Origins of the Anglo-American Right, and Guns and Violence, The English Experience. And we quote from you often, so it's good to have you on for a few minutes to talk about that, and we look forward to doing that again sometime.
Well, thank you very much. I enjoyed it, having a chance to speak with you and your audience.
We'll come back and take some of your phone calls right after this.
You are listening to Point of View. For materials offered during the program, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number, 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. I know a number of you would like to talk about the Second Amendment and gun control. And one of the reasons I'm bringing this up is we have now a gun control group that has been funded by the former New York mayor. I mentioned that just a minute ago, Michael Bloomberg. They're going around surveying candidates for federal office, so these would be senators and members of Congress, asking them in these midterm elections how they stand on these gun-related issues, because they want to constrain your right to own a firearm. So it is important to understand this issue, and one of the reasons I jumped at the opportunity, even though I only had about a half an hour with Dr. Joyce Malcolm, is she really is kind of the leading expert on the history of the Second Amendment. Her piece, her article, To Keep and Bear Arms, The Origins of an Anglo-American Right, came out a number of years ago as kind of a historical piece. And that alone should help you understand what the origins of the Second Amendment are. But then I did spend just a little bit of time talking about her newer book, In Guns and Violence, that is called The English Experience, in which she talks about a time in which there was virtually no gun control in England to the time when now it's almost impossible for any law-abiding citizen to own a firearm, and the implications that this is having in their culture, because now you have a whole generation growing up going into crime knowing full well they probably will not be stopped. And home invasions are actually increasing dramatically in the UK. As she pointed out a minute ago, they actually prefer to have the homeowner there because, number one, they know the homeowner is not armed. Number two, if they're at home, they probably don't have their burglar alarm on, their security alarm on. And so you can begin to see some of the implications of that. So if you've got some comments or questions about the Second Amendment, how you would vote for a candidate for or against based upon his or her stand on guns, love to get your comments. 1-800-351-1212. Kind of the leading expert on the history of the Second Amendment, Joyce Malcolm, certainly one of the experts we mentioned a minute ago when we had Chris call in here on the history as well as the statistics on the issue of gun control and concealed carry would be Dr. John Lott. He's been on the program with us before. And so let's take some of those phone calls that are left over from the previous half hour. In California, KYCC, Garla, thank you for calling today.
Thank you, sir. I'll be brief. Have you ever heard of a book called Masters of Deceit?
Sure.
Okay, well, I haven't read it, but I know someone who did, and they said one of the very first steps a entity seeking to overthrow a government in a country is to take away the armaments of its citizens.
Well, and I think that's pretty well documented. I mean, I know there would be some exceptions to that, but the general rule has always been that an armed citizenry is a very significant deterrent to tyranny. And so there are all sorts of historical examples, whether you look at in many of these communist countries, totalitarian countries, or the rest. It's also been an argument that was supposedly attributed to the Japanese. It turns out that that was apocryphal, but nevertheless, even though that one individual didn't say it, there was this idea of the Japanese, why they did not want to invade the American homeland, because they said there'd be an American with a gun behind every tree or behind every blade of grass. And so that is a deterrent not only to a tyrant, it has been somewhat of a deterrent to other aggressors, because we are perhaps one of the most armed countries in the world. And I think there has been some hesitation in the past, certainly not now, we're a superpower, but back when we weren't a superpower, but still, you had to come to grips with the fact that there were a lot of armed citizens, and armed citizens can instantaneously form themselves into a voluntary militia and thus protect the homeland. So I think the argument that has been made in that book and in other historical documents certainly stands the test of time. So I appreciate you bringing that up today.
Thank you, sir. Goodbye.
Well, I appreciate you calling. I hope you'll call again. Let's go this time from California on one coast to South Carolina on the other coast, listening on the Good News Network. Linda, what would you like to share with us today?
Yeah, I cannot believe the thinking of the people these days. I don't know whether they haven't been taught in school or the history of this country or the Constitution in this country in schools growing up. Why do people think they need somebody else to defend them and they can't defend themselves?
Yeah, and I think we've taught that the government is the answer to all of your problems. I mean, recognize that a very high percentage...
the government is the problem.
Well, that's fine. But I'm just saying that's where that comes from, that idea that, every solution to our problems comes from the government. And that, of course, as we are starting to find out, is certainly not the case. But go on, let you finish your point.
Why can't the states along the border gather a militia in that state and control and guard their own borders instead of waiting for the government to do what we need to do for ourselves? It's stupid thinking.
Yeah, and the only point I would make is I think the governor of the state of Texas, Rick Perry, said, well, I'm not going to wait for the president to act. I'm going to send the National Guard down there. And I think that may be part of the answer. And I think the further answer is government needs to do at least one thing right, and that is to protect its citizens. I mean, if there's one argument you can make from Scripture, and you find that in Romans 13, 1-7, government bearing the sword, and the idea is the government needs to protect us. And when the government does not protect us from foreign invaders, when the government does not control the borders, when you have a government and a state and a country that doesn't have borders, you don't have a state or a country. So obviously those are important issues, and certainly that is one more aspect of that. But if you'd like to join us, gun control, I suspect, is going to be a big issue in this campaign. You've always, of course, had the National Rifle Association evaluate various candidates and give them anywhere from an A to an F on their stand on the Second Amendment. But now you have Michael Bloomberg's gun control group also evaluating people. And I think they argue that there are so many people that are fed up with the, quote, American gun culture that they're ready to vote people out of office that believe in the Second Amendment. And you heard the comments already today from Dr. Joyce Malcolm. Even though the Supreme Court has ruled on two separate cases, one out of Chicago, one out of the District of Columbia, still it doesn't seem to be settled in the minds of individuals. So this is why I'm talking about it today. I suspect that it will be a campaign issue, and it's important to educate yourself about these issues. That's why I wanted to bring her on for a few minutes to talk about the history of the Second Amendment. We can also bring Dr. John Lott back on to talk about some of the statistical analysis that he has done, but I think she gave us kind of a thumbnail sketch of some of that. And so if you would like to join our conversation, let's go back to the phones. We'll go to the state of Texas, I think. Pat, thank you for calling today.
Hello. In reference to the Second Amendment, it gives us the right to bear arms in order for that we can protect ourselves. So when a person comes up to you and they have a gun and they're going to do something to you, and you have a gun and a cell phone, what are you going to pick up? Are you going to pick your phone up and call 911, or are you going to defend yourself? And basically, no matter whether or not you have some kind of criminal charge against you or not, once you've done your time and you've shown that you've been responsible and you've learned, you've learned from your mistakes, you should be able to protect yourself and your family and your business from anybody coming in, and as well as back in the Western days, even little kids were taught how to use guns and rifles, and they were taught the responsibility of the gun.
Right.
That it wasn't to solve problems that you have for anger issues or being mad at somebody, but it was for you to hunt and to protect yourself. So essentially, that's what I'm saying.
Well, I think it's a very good point, and I'm going to come back and talk about a study that was actually done that I think illustrates only so well that indeed if young people grow up and actually understand how to use a firearm, they're less likely to get involved in a crime. And this was a study done a number of years ago by the Department of Justice. It's referred to as the Rochester study, and I'll come back and talk about that in just a minute before we take some more phone calls, which illustrate the point. But I think, Pat, what we have going on right now is we have a whole generation of young people that have not grown up around firearms. So as a result, it's sort of, you're sort of afraid of that. In other words, I oftentimes say, what I'm not up on, I'm down on. In other words, it's kind of, I'm fearful because I don't know what it is. And also, the only time I see firearms being used is by gangbangers or drug runners. So I see firearms equal bad outcomes. And so as a result, this is why I think you're starting to see a fairly significant part of our population really beginning to want to overturn the Second Amendment. So when we come back, I want to real quickly, before I take some more phone calls, explain this study, which I think makes your case. And I'll talk about that right after these important messages.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
A few more minutes. We'll take some phone calls in just a minute. But Pat raised a very good question. I want to come back and try to explain this from an empirical point of view because it really makes her case. And that is, there was a study done a number of years ago. It's called the Rochester study. It was a study on urban delinquency. And it was really trying to figure out why young people get into delinquent behavior. So only a part of the study had to do with guns, but it was a very instructive part. Let's first of all acknowledge that this particular study, since they were looking at delinquents obviously oversample dramatically those individuals most likely to be juvenile delinquents. More than that, they also oversamplized. As a matter of fact, they focused exclusively on males. So don't take this too far, because it was only looking at men, not women. It was only looking primarily at delinquent children. But here was the interesting thing. They looked at all sorts of issues, you know, that you would look at: chronic offenders, family background, poverty, and whatever. But they did look at the issue of firearms. And this study, again, will give ulcers to the gun controllers, the gun grabbers, because what they found is, of the group of boys who owned a gun legally by the time they were 9th or 10th grade, not one of them committed any crime or delinquent act with a gun. 0%. Okay, of the boys who did not, but by the time they were 9th or 10th already owned a legal gun, that was 1%. That's kind of a footnote, because there were a few that got them later. So really the comparison you want to do is those who did not have a gun by 9th or 10th, and those who illegally own guns, 24% would eventually use a gun in a crime. So the point is that when you do see young people using a gun for a crime, almost always it was obtained illegally. And interestingly enough, those who grew up around guns, knew about them, understood what they were for, had respect for them. Interestingly enough, you didn't find any at all. So then if you look at the overall rate, I know I'm racing through a study that probably could be a half an hour discussion. When you look at the overall rate of street crimes, looking at the fact that this was, again, oversampling males and people that are delinquent, the boys who had lawfully owned guns, 14% eventually committed a crime of some street crime, but not with guns. And of the non-gun owners, 24% committed a street crime. And so you can see that by the time you get to the illegal gun owners, 74% committed a crime. So if you look at those who grew up around guns, none of them committed a crime with a gun. Some of them who were delinquents later on did commit some kind of street crime, but not with a gun. But when you look at those who had them illegally, the chart was, just off the charts. And so again, it illustrates that teaching young people about weapons, teaching them rightly about how to use them, to respect them, and of course those who have been through maybe a concealed carry program or class learns about the use of lethal force, that tends to actually make those people the most likely to be law-abiding citizens. And so that is almost completely the opposite of the kinds of things that we hear, because the implication is that the guns caused the crime. No, it's what was in the heads of the people with the guns that caused the crime. Let's go back and get some more phone calls. I'm sure you would like to weigh in with some of these comments, especially as I think this gun control issue is going to be part of some of these congressional elections. And so we'll go to Vinny in Texas. Vinny, what would you like to share with our audience today? Do we have Vinny there? Well, I guess we don't have Vinny. We'll see if we can get Vinny there in just a minute. But I did want to give you a little bit of that background on that study, because if nothing else, what we are just beginning to discover is individuals that really do understand this issue, and in particular those who have actually been trained in these particular areas certainly can begin to apply some of these principles better. Do we have Vinny now? I'm going to see if we can pick him up and put him back on the air, because I think he wanted to share with us. So, Vinny, what's your comment for us today?
You're talking to me? This is Vinny.
Yes, go ahead.
My comment is pretty much about what's going on right now, where the Hamas and the people that have got their hands on the governments in other countries, and especially the fact that there's a pretty much of a Christian Holocaust going on over there right now. I think that the government needs to take a look at their motive, why they feel it's necessary for normal law-abiding citizens to give up their guns, because I think they're having a problem with the fact that maybe they're not too comfortable with the way they're acting right now, and they're worried about revolution. But, us law-abiding citizens that have guns and protect our homes with them, we're not trying to take on the government here. We just want the government to respect the Constitution. And the reason I say that is because I was in the military from 1967 to 1976, and I took an oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. So I'm sure, and I'd like to think that maybe they're not afraid of me and have no reason to be. And we surely don't want the government to take our guns away from us simply because they think that the guns are the problem.
Right. You know, I had somebody the other day say, you know, I left my gun on the front porch and it never shot anybody, and I came back and it didn't do anything at all. So obviously it wasn't the gun that was the problem. First of all, Vinny, thank you for your service to this country. But also, I think it brings us back to something else. You got kind of two philosophies out there right now. One that says, you know, armed citizens, especially those that have been through a course in which they've learned the proper use of guns. A lot of people, for example, that get their concealed carry permits have to go through that and learn a great deal about knowing how and when to discharge a weapon, the use of lethal force, and what is or is not appropriate. Those are oftentimes seen by even people in law enforcement as those who are the friends of the state, the people that could be called upon if anarchy breaks out to help bring control in the community. Because if indeed anarchy breaks out and everybody becomes lawless, you're going to have more people committing crimes than you have individuals who could actually bring criminals to justice. So that is certainly the case. But we also have a mindset right now saying you having a gun pose a threat to America, you pose a threat to me, and you should not have those. And so one of the reasons I wanted to bring this up today is, number one, for you to have a chance to hear from Dr. Joyce Malcolm, who I still think is one of the best experts on the history of the Second Amendment, but also to recognize that we are moving into a time right now where there will be members of Congress and candidates rated on the basis of how they stand on the issue of guns. The National Rifle Association has been doing that for many years. Gun Owners of America have been doing that for many years. But now you have Michael Bloomberg's group and others that will be evaluating this as well. And they're convinced that gun control is a winning issue in the campaigns and that people will actually elect candidates who want to control our guns, who want to actually limit our Second Amendment rights. So we thought it was important for you to hear a little bit more about this. And just before we end the program today, let me mention some resources that I think would be helpful to you. First of all is this review of Joyce Malcolm's book, Guns and Violence, The English Experience. It's referred to as the gold standard of gun control, and she takes that issue on and reminds us of what happened in the UK. In there, it also has references to her previous books as well, including To Keep and Bear Arms, The Origins of an Anglo-American Right. And so if you'd like to just read something that might be very helpful to you, if you'd like to write a letter to the editor or post some things on your Facebook page, certainly those articles are available on our website today. We also have the video, which was an interview that was done with her, and it's about 7 minutes long on the English Experience. This would be something I would encourage you to watch. It's about 7 minutes long, and then you could hit the share button, put it on your Facebook page so that you could maybe have a conversation, because her book is a reminder of what has happened in a country that decided to implement the kind of gun control legislation that many of these advocates, many of these gun control advocates want to implement, and we see what has happened now in the UK. So we've given you quite a bit of information. I know many of you are activists and you feel very strongly about these issues, and we have given you some great resources to go and to make the case in your sphere of influence, wherever that might be. So feel free to visit our website, pointofview.net. And as you do so, I hope that you'll also take the time to click on some of those buttons to get involved if you aren't already receiving our email blasts and our show threads to educate you about some of the issues we'll be talking about. And we also have a donate button if you can help us out financially. We hope that you have appreciated the program today, and we certainly want to thank Andrew, Catherine, and Chris for their help behind the scenes. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
You have been listening to Point of View. For materials offered on the program, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, zip 75221, or call our toll-free number 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151. 5151.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries and is supported by your generous tax-deductible contributions.